So in September, Apple announced the iPad Pro. It's been rumored for a long time that Apple's going to release a 12.9-inch iPad, and finally it has arrived. Today it was released. So we're going to run a couple of comparisons to the iPad Air 2. Now there have been questions on who is going to be buying the iPad Pro, and should people still buy the iPad Air 2? Is the performance still on par? And how much of a difference will be day-to-day use? Is it really that much noticeable? The iPad Pro is thicker and larger, as we can tell by the screen size, 12.9 inches compared to the 9.7. It's like comparing an iPhone 6s to an iPhone 6s Plus. At first it's kind of awkward of carrying it and handling it, but once you start getting used to it, the iPad Air 2 feels like an iPad mini. Now Apple did talk about the performance of this device, and the one thing that did surprise me is that they actually maintained to keep the same Touch ID as the iPad Air 2. The performance is the same, and it's not like the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus, where it's instantaneous. As soon as you touch it, it actually gets you logged on. It's not that I'm saying that it's a bad thing. I do like the Touch ID on this device, so sometimes it's a little bit slower, but unless you're really using a 6s or 6s Plus, you won't notice the difference. And setting it up is the same way as it has been previously. Nothing has changed there. Just follow the steps, get your fingerprint enrolled, and you'll be set to go. Now the one thing that I did notice in the Apple ID option, I don't see the skip as an option anymore. Now that could be just something that, since I've always used an Apple ID, putting it in there and not paying attention to it, but I can remember there used to be a skip option. Looks like now you do have to set up your Apple ID right away on your new device. And this seems to be a new feature to iOS 9. Like I said, previously I can remember there used to be a skip option. So both the devices are running iOS 9.1, and we have clean software running on them, so they've been just set up to fresh, clean install. And we're just going to run a couple of day-to-day tasks just to see if there is that much of a performance difference for people to switch to the iPad Pro if they already have an iPad Air 2. So now we've launched on the iPad Pro and on the iPad Air 2 Safari. And then we're going to go to Mac Rumors. So the iPad Pro does launch it a little bit faster. The iPad Air 2 is right behind, but not that far behind. And when we scroll, they're both able to handle the task without any issues. So now let's remember the iPad Pro does run the A9X, and the iPad Air 2 runs the A8X. So 2 gigs of RAM on the iPad Air 2, 4 gigs of RAM on the Mac Pro. So when it comes to maybe loading more web pages, the iPad Pro will be able to handle more. And that comes to also running multiple tasks. So if you're running multiple applications, yes, it's going to be much faster. So let's go to another web page just to see if there's a big difference, and not that much. So day-to-day use, I'm not seeing that much of a difference between the iPad Pro and the iPad Air 2. Now, we're not always going to get the most accurate reading when it comes to browsing the web, especially when two devices are side by side. But so far, both are performing on par with each other. And when we have the world clock, it pulls up really fast. No issues. I don't see any stuttering on either device. They're both able to handle the task without any issues at all. Now I'm going to launch iBooks just to see if there's any difference in loading here. So the iPad Pro definitely loaded it faster, but again, for a day-to-day user, Will that be that much of a difference? The App Store. Now, the one thing is that in the App Store, there are going to be apps that are specifically made for the iPad Pro, where it's going to utilize the new screen design and the pencil as well as the keyboard. So for drawing and illustrations, it's going to be something that's going to be incorporated more to the iPad Pro. Also, multitasking features might be accessible to both devices, but the iPad Pro will probably see more integration further down the road because of the more landscape on the screen. Now, so far I've been running the standard Apple apps and I haven't had any issues. So far, they're doing what they're supposed to. We're going to open up podcast and same loading. So now we can see here it's smooth. I don't see any stuttering on either device. Let's go ahead and close out these applications. Alright, let's go back to Safari. So here we have Redmond Pi, and I just want to see if it's still smooth. Yep, smooth on both devices, and they're responding the way that they're supposed to. Now the one thing that I want to try to do is go to YouTube on both devices and see if I can play a video. This is to test out the speakers. So when I first got it, I did test out the speakers and they do sound really good, especially when you're holding it. For some reason, when you hold it, you cup your hand on both sides when it's in landscape mode, so it actually echoes pretty well and delivers a good sound. Way better than the iPad Air 2, because the iPad Air 2 only has it on one side instead of on both sides. So here you want to take a look at the iPad Pro keyboard. So I actually like that keyboard. It's very easy to type, it has extra keys, and I fall in love with it really quick. I'm used to typing on the iPad Air 2, and I type even faster on the iPad Pro. But the one thing is, don't get used to that keyboard, because when it comes to third-party applications, they have not incorporated into that system yet. So that means that Apple applications will have it, third-party applications not yet. So let's go ahead and play a video. So this is something that I've noticed. It's a small glitch, but it plays the audio, but it will not play the video. And again, this was trying to test the speakers, but I ended up not putting the sound in here because I kept having an issue where it would not launch the video. If I had the app, it would launch it fine. But going through Safari, it will not launch the video, but it does launch the sound. So, and I tried a couple of things. I tried to turn it off. I tried to close out the applications and then try again. But it only wanted to play the sound, not the video. Now, this does sometimes happen to Safari when you go through YouTube because it wants you to direct it to the app. I did not have the app installed, so I just will not test it any further because for some reason it just did not want to play it for me. But the iPad Air 2 played it just fine. Now, I've been using this device for a couple hours and I've been testing a couple of things here and there. The one thing that I noticed is that the lower part of the screen towards the home button, it does indent a little bit more. Well, it's hard to say exactly why because I'm not opening up the device, but it can be because there's a little bit more space and some of the components are utilized towards the top half because it does not happen on the higher end. Now, I did run a Geekbench. Now, if you see, the iPad Air 2 does run 9.02 and the iPad Pro is running 9.1. And we registered 4 gigs of RAM and about 2.25 gigahertz processor speed. Now, this is just to kind of show you the Geekbench score. This is not day-to-day use. Day-to-day use, they're actually on par with each other. And I don't think anybody will notice a difference. But if you are interested in the Geekbench, the iPad Pro scores higher than the MacBook, and that's amazing. So maybe in iOS 10 we'll actually see more utilization. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Keep watching. Please subscribe.